Cosmologos, Tetragrammaton, and the Logos Word. The Symbolic, Kabbalistic, and Mystic Keys to Universal Understanding by Daniel Gautier. Part 1.
We are going to examine the nature and beginnings of creation and the cosmos, particularly in light of the great philosophers, mystics, and theologians of this world throughout history. In this first slide, we have these ideas of creation by two of the great systems in philosophy and mystical traditions, one being Pythagoras and his cosmological conception as embodied in the Tetractes, which is the triangular shape that you see with the 10 dots. Beneath that is a general equivalent that was provided by the Kabbalah and the Hebrew mystical tradition. Now, the words cosmos and order, and cosmos was believed to have been perhaps first used by Pythagoras to describe his philosophical, metaphysical, and cosmological theories. Cosmos means order. And logos is related to that. It was a Greek word meaning variously reason, word, or order. So the combination of the two words refers to this original order of creation. Many of the great mystery schools and the Kabbalah and Pythagoras basically conceived of creation in terms of numerical generation. And it's very clearly described by Pythagoras in this model, where you have the first little dot there, called the monad, signifying unity. The second being the dyad, meaning division, and a separation of the original unity into a subject and an object, in order that the original subjectivity or unity could be expressed and experienced in ultimately an infinitude of variations, which is all the cosmos is: creation, humanity, and all of nature. And the third principle, the three dots, it's the triad, following the monad, dyad, and then the triad. And that's the principle of harmonization. So the dot in the center basically balances and harmonizes the outer two polarities. And the last one, the tetrad, is a reference to the material world and the final materialization of these prior impulses, basically number as idea. And beneath that, the Tetragrammaton is, in a sense, another expression, providing another mask for these same ideas, these same principles. And the Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh is the name of God as it was spelled in the Old Testament, and was usually translated or transliterated as Yahweh or Jehovah. But if you break it down, you look at the four letters, they are in some ways akin, even in their configuration, to the Tetractes. For example, you read in the Hebrew from the right to the left, and the Yud, the first letter, it looks like a small flame. And the first principle in all these systems is considered the generative force, the spiritual force, or in elemental terms, the fire principle. So you can equate in the Tetractes each of these qualities, these four qualities or numbers, to elemental equivalents. So the first principle is the fire, generative. The second is the water, the receptive. The third is the air, which can link the two. And the fourth is earth. So you can think of the Tetragrammaton. The first one looks like a small flame, and generation is akin to the dot. The second one, you have that same division of polarity, masculine and feminine, object and subject, in the vertical pillars. And in all these traditions, the vertical usually refers to, be it a line or an arrow, refers to the masculine principle, the spiritual principle, the fire principle. And the horizontal plane usually refers to the feminine receptive principle. And this is extended in, for example, in Hinduism, where the upright pillar is worshipped at Shiva. That's the god of fire, the masculine principle. The horizontal plane is the feminine principle, or the yoni. And the two gods are worshipped as such, as a union of those two. So you'll find this is a demonstration of how these numerical impulses, what I call the primal inclinations, which are unmanifest and suggestions of so much, but not particularized. And as creation progresses, it becomes more particular. And you have all these variations and all these masks applied to it. And the religions and the mystical traditions will give you a consistent set of masks or metaphors. And if you study them enough, you can see the commonalities and the linkages. And here is another usage or definition of the logos. And here we have spelled out the Greek definition of the logos.
The logos is the fundamental principle of order and knowledge in the universe. It is the primal seed or universal idea from which all thought and matter derive their form.
So the painting that you see there is one of my paintings, and it's an expression of this fourfold law. And you will see that in the upper right-hand corner is the red of the fire principle, and you have an upright triangle. To the left of that is the feminine principle, and it's basically ultramarine, which refers to the water receptive principle. And beneath that, you have basically the child of those two polarities, which is the sun, S-O-N, S-U-N, and it's blue, partly because that's a reference to the sky and the air principle, and also to the sun. That's why there's a gold oval or circle beneath the blue egg, because of the sun, S-U-N, the solar logos, as it were, is found in the sky. And finally, on the right, you have the green, which refers to the earth. And in the center is the Hebrew letter Aleph, which is the first letter in the alphabet, just as the A is in other alphabets. And that refers to the first principle, the unmanifest principle. And that's why it's basically couched in the black circle there. Heraclitus was one of the first. Heraclitus and Pythagoras were approximately the same time. And while Pythagoras expressed the term cosmos, Heraclitus made the logos his byword, in a sense. In some of the fragments that were collected, they don't have his original writings, as they don't have Pythagoras' original writings, but subsequent writers collected some of his works. And he says this about the logos.
To this universal reason, logos, which I unfold, although it always exists, men make themselves insensible, both before they have heard it and when they have heard it for the first time. For, notwithstanding, all things happen according to this reason.
Now, this principle of the logos, it can be rather elusive, partly because it's the ultimate abstraction. And most people, they concretize these principles. And that's the nature of the various religions. They give you these concrete masks or metaphors or parables to explain these all-inclusive, rather abstract, but implicitly infinite principles or powers. And it's all around us, this universal seed, this logos. And it forms invisibly all matter, all structure, all society, all religion, all humanity. And this is the nature. His expression here accompanies the whole principle of initiation in the various mystery schools, in that you have to prepare the mind and the soul to conceive in terms of these universals before it can be fully absorbed. So initially, when you're introduced to these principles and this logos, these primal inclinations, it may be hard to grasp. But he said, notwithstanding, everything grows out of this seed, this kernel, this logoic source.
All things come to be in accordance with the Logos. The universe is in constant change, and there is an underlying order or reason for this change. These two ideas, constant change and the reason for this change, provided a model of dialectical dynamics which explained the workings of nature and the universe.
This is where Heraclitus is a little more difficult to grasp in his definition, conception of the logos, because it is very, very clear and rather concrete. When you have the Tetragrammaton and the Tetractes, they're these forms, these visible forms, be it in word or in symbol. Heraclitus believed that part of this unchanging order was the fact that you had these two opposing dialectical principles. That's why he's considered the first, or one of the first, dialectical philosophers, basically conceiving the world in terms of this incessant change between these two primeval forces, the monad and the dyad. And that's why he was known to say, one of his fragments is, "You never step into the same river twice." So this world is constantly changing. That's one of the laws of the logos. But overriding this constant change is a unity. Heraclitus used the symbol or energy of fire as an emblem representation of this matrix. It is the underlying constant or commonality behind all outer phenomenon. Thus, Heraclitus stated,
This world, the same for all, neither any of the gods nor any man has made, but it always was, and is, and shall be, an ever-living fire.
And this principle and the element of fire reflects the nature of this primal logos, again, what I call the primal inclinations.
There is exchange of all things for fire, and of fire for all things, as there is of wares for gold, and of gold for wares.
And so there may be a transmutation, a transformation, an extension, an emanation from this first principle. And an exchange of sorts, this underlying seed pattern is there. And it dictates to all and precedes all.
There is one wisdom to understand the intelligent will by which all things are governed through all.
So will is often equated with the fire principle, the generative force. And the will in this case can be equated with this logos. It's just energy. It is energy as impulse and inclination, which is suggested by numbers or the symbols of the Tetragrammaton, but always lies beyond that. And this is an illumination that I did for the work of Heraclitus from my book, The Illuminated Word. And it's structured in terms of a cryptogram, much as the alchemical emblems were conceived. So that it's a basic diagram of the cosmos, and the quote is one of his preeminent quotes on the nature of the change and the logos. The harmony of the world is a harmony of oppositions, as in the case of the bow and the lyre. So in this case, you can see under the circle of the A, and the circle is the symbol of spirit, and the circle is also considered by Parmenides and Pythagoras to be the perfect form and reflective of eternity. And beneath it is the lyre. And in this case, the lyre refers to the implicitly numerical essence of the Logos. And it is the bow, that's the material object, that draws out the harmony and the music of the lyre. And in this case, the lyre is simply number. And in each of the strings of the lyre, and this is something that was very seminal to Pythagoras' teaching and his theories on music, we're talking about numerical proportion and ratios and intervals. But the lyre, without this material object, and I shape it in the form of a half moon, which is in these various mystical traditions, is a symbol of the material principle, the maternal principle. So with the interaction of those two, it's the matter that draws out from these mathematical absolutes the harmony of the world and the harmony of greater creation. But without the polarities, without the feminine receptive bow, as Plato calls it, the receptacle, the material receptacle, the lyre, these quasi-numerical absolutes, are just in potentia. And it takes that communion interaction between the two polarities for all of creation to arise. Now, Pythagoras, we've already discussed the Tetragrammaton, which we see on the left. And many others have made the correlation between the Tetragrammaton and the Tetragrammaton, which you see on the right. And there is a book called The Golden Verses of Pythagoras, which contains his teaching, again, from secondary sources, Neo-Pythagoreans, Platonists, because there's no record of his original writings. But one of the most significant aphorisms or sayings is the following.
Hail, holy Tetrad, symbol immense and pure, source of nature and model of the gods.
So this is an encapsulation of everything we have been saying. This symbol that is vast and immeasurable, though it can be reduced in symbolic terms to these numbers, the implications and derivations from these 10 numbers are essentially infinite. And this is the source and model of the gods, which is to say, the hierarchies of greater intelligences or forces larger than humanity.
And before all, keep thy soul to its faithful duty, and you shall know the principle and end of all.
Now, this is reference to his initiatory school, and it's commonly conceived that Pythagoras is simply a mathematician, one of the great and earliest mathematicians. But the mathematics provided the underpinning for what was more significant, and that is his mystery or spiritual school, whose whole intention is to come in communion with and develop the soul, that is the greater universal part of ourselves.
If we wish to study mathematics in a Pythagorean manner, we ought to pursue zealously its God-inspired, anagogic, cathartic, and initiatory process.
I won't go into great detail, but Iamblichus was the third in succession in the Neoplatonic school founded by Plotinus. And basically, the Neoplatonists, which we will discuss later, emphasized and embraced the mystical aspects of Plato's teaching. So he wrote a book, a biography on Pythagoras in the 4th century, and our information on Pythagoras is from much later sources. And this is a summation of the correlation between mathematics and the initiatory school and the transformation of human nature, human consciousness, and embracing an elevation of the soul or eternal principle. And to study mathematics according to the Pythagorean manner, you're thinking of it in context of its relationship to divinity and the ultimate principles. And anagogia, which Plato goes into this principle in detail in some of his dialogues, anagogia basically means ascent. and more explicitly, it's the ascent of the soul. And this is a commonality shared between Pythagoras and Plato, who we will discuss next. And the whole conception that upon birth, the soul descends into the body, and the soul drives the body, but the soul gets lost within the body in the material world, and it's for the initiate and the philosopher, the lover of wisdom, to identify with this eternal part and develop this eternal part. And the means by which you do that, and according to the Pythagorean and Platonic initiatory schools, is anagogic, this rising of the soul, through principles of association of harmony, and more literally and directly, the harmony of mathematics, music, astronomy. You associate with these eternal higher principles, and it teaches the soul to identify with these forces that lie behind all manifest phenomenon, and thus raise the soul eventually. And catharsis is basically a release of this spiritual energy and the initiatory process.